Okay, good morning, everyone. As Miranda was saying, I'm Hector Caruncho. I am from Spain, but married a nice Canadian lady and have been living here already for more than 7 years. First in Saskatchewan, in Saskatoon, in the middle of the prairies, and now in beautiful Victoria. I'm a professor in the Division of Medical Sciences here at UVic, and I'm also holding an affiliated position as affiliate professor of psychiatry at UBC. Just before we start, I wanted to show you the nice campus that we have at UBC where I work. It's just the area, this area showed by the asterisks, but mostly to show the people that is working with us in our attempt to pursue patient-oriented research. This means that we work with the mental recovery partners, with Hazel Merrill, principally on schizophrenia, and also here with the BC support unit with Taylor Henstock, and Lisa Ridgway is our patient partner. She suffered treatment-resistant depression and is working with us in some aspects that we will explain. And here on the right is the people working in our lab or with some collaborators that addresses some of the points that I'm going to talk about during this webinar. I'm a neuroscientist, but I didn't start directly working on mental health or working directly on the human brain. My first studies were on fish neurobiology. I was studying some areas of the brain of the fish. Actually, we were going to the seaport, we were fishing the fish, and then we were extracting the brain out, and everyone was coming there to see how we were doing that. That was a long time ago. Later on, I started studying the pharmacology of the nervous system, how drugs, therapeutic drugs, act on the nervous system already on the human brain. And lately means for the past 15 years, I have been engaged on translational research, so on how to apply the knowledge that we have acquired, so that brings out some specific outcomes that are of importance for mental health research. As you probably know, if you have attended some of these seminars before, patient-oriented research is done in a different way than conventionally clinical or community health research. In conventional clinical or community health research, the patients usually they are the subjects that we can take surveys on, or we can take data upon, so that we analyze the data and reach some conclusions. But in patient-oriented research, the patients are our partners. They are part of our research team. We will have the sample of Lisa Ridgway related to that. We are trying to develop research to answer questions that are of importance for the patients or that have been developed for the patients, and we try to follow that up in terms of measurement of outcomes that are important for the patients per se. Now, I work in patient-oriented research in mental health. This is similar, but at the same time, a little bit different than in other areas of health or in other areas of medicine. I will give some examples of that. For example, this year, I have been attending 3 different meetings. The one of the Society for Neuroscience, just this past month in Chicago. The one of the Society for Biological Psychiatry in May, also in Chicago. And the one of the World Psychiatric Association meeting in Lisbon, in Portugal, in the middle of the summer. In all these meetings, I was attending sessions about depression, which is my main field of work. Now, the questions that came out in these meetings and the language being used on those meetings were completely different. In the neuroscience meetings, people were talking about animal models and what we can learn about depression by studying animals, and stress the animals and see how they react, and try to find if antidepressants can correct those behaviors, etc. in the Society of Biological Psychiatry, we were talking about doing imaging studies in patients and analyzing the blood samples to develop biomarkers that can inform us about depression. And in the World Psychiatric Association, they were talking mostly about the diagnosis of depression. In the DSM, the book that they use mostly in terms of diagnosis is valid or not, what are the best antidepressants, how to use properly them, etc. So what I'm trying to say is that many times when we engage in translational research, and that is valid also when we use a POR component, we need to use different languages, and if not, we get lost in translation. And that's one of the issues that we have when engaging on POR, is that we need to still learn, as a basic scientist, an additional language, the one used by the patients per se. So the first recommendation that I have for people who are basic science researchers and who can be viewing this seminar today or in the future is that we need to learn the language of the patients too, if we are going to be able to engage successfully in mental health research with a POR component. And that's the part that we are tackling here. As I'm saying in this slide, there are two important issues in relation to mental health and mental health disorders. One relates to explanation, what is going on there and how can I solve it? And one relates to understanding, what is going on with this specific person, with this patient, how this patient is internalizing the things related to his or her disorder, and how can we move from there. There was a time in the past, at the time of psychoanalysis, and when there was basically mostly talking therapy associated with mental disorders, where the most prominent part was related to the understanding, knowing what was going on with this specific patient and trying to define how could we help him or her. But nowadays, mostly is related to explanation. What is going wrong in relation to the brain of these people? What are the deficiencies? And how can we use an approach to solve this deficiency? So looking more at disorders and looking less at the people. For good or for bad, psychiatry and mental health approaches nowadays are conceptualized in this way. If some of you have experience of going to a family physician with some complaints that pertain to mental health disorders, unfortunately, they don't have the time and sometimes they don't have the training to take proper care of you. So they basically try to ascertain a diagnosis, which means putting the patient in a barrel with a label, and with this label comes associated this therapy. That works quite well sometimes, that works relatively well many times, that works not well at all in other times. So what I primarily believe is that nowadays patient-oriented research can give us a component in terms of understanding what is going on with this specific patient, a patient partner that works with us, that can help us to link what is going on with this patient with a proper explanation, and that will help to foster research on mental health and provide better approaches that at the end bring about the outcomes that we will wish or that the patient will wish was coming to them. This is simply what is shown in this slide is simply how research is done from the lab till it reaches the patient per se. Many of the components, let's imagine, for example, one drug that now is being used for mental health. Well, usually that drug was at the beginning developed in a lab, being tested in a lab, in animals, in cultured cells in vitro, and it was observed that this drug could have some potentially good effects, and thereby was then later on tested on people for toxicity, for the specific effects, etc. And when it was deemed that it worked well on people and it got the specific approvals by the government agencies, then it came onto the public health, onto the public health setting, and it was being able to be prescribed for these specific conditions. So there are three levels of research: one's done in the laboratory, one's done in the clinic, for example, many clinical trials, and one's done already at the community level once these approaches are already out there. Unfortunately, there are many gaps, they call valleys of death or translational research, that basically preclude a proper translation of the research done in the lab to the research done in the clinic, and then from the research done in the clinic to the research done at the community health level. Now, when we are talking about patient-oriented research, usually most of the approaches, this in mental health, these come at this level. So at the community health level, patients are being asked, okay, what are the important issues for you? How can we improve how we are tackling them? Do you believe that if, for example, you are taking a drug once per week, it will be better for you in terms of taking it, that if you need to do it 2 or 3 times per day? Do you believe that the community health settings that we have here are working or not? And how can we improve it? And they trying to define a research setting to check if doing it this way, it really works, etc. But what I believe is that sometimes the questions that are of importance for patients are not just solved by doing research at this level, or perhaps not just as the community health and the clinical level, but also needs a component of doing tests in the lab. And what I'm going to propose, what we are trying to do, is how to involve patient partners in patient-oriented research that takes together research in the lab, research in the clinic, and research at the community health level. Why I say so? Let's have this example. This is the outcomes of a survey done in Alberta with patients of lived experience. This is an application of POR trying to ascertain what were the most important research questions for them in relation to depression, which is one of the main fields in what I work. If we can see here, the number one question for them is, okay, what we would want to know is which treatment therapy or which treatment method will be more successful for long-term remission or recovery. And usually each patient will be saying, what is the most successful for me? So one thing that we already know is that the one that can be more successful for patient Joseph perhaps is not the one that is the most successful one for patient Susan or for patient Mary. So the question could be then reconceptualized in terms of what is the best therapeutic strategy for this specific person. And the second thing that we know is that for a number of people, the therapies, the antidepressant therapies that we have nowadays, they are not working so well. So can we determine which patients will respond well to a specific treatment, which patients will not respond so well, and then try to devise different treatments for these patients? And at the same time, can we do it in a fast approach? Because both psychotherapy and also pharmacotherapy for depression, they take a long time, usually more than 1 month, in having proper effects. So the thing is that to tackle some of these main questions that are being proposed by patient partners, we cannot do that just at the community health level. And that's what I believe, that POR in mental health will need to be expanded so that patients can have a contribution at the lab level, at the clinical level, and at the community setting level. So let's give some examples related to what we are doing. It is very possible that if you follow these webinars, perhaps you already have listened to some of these sportcasts, interviews done by some patient partners, by Beverly Pomeroy and Lisa Ridgway. So here is Lisa. This is Lisa Ridgway. She's a patient partner working with us on depression. She suffered from treatment-resistant depression. She had a very, very hard time for a long time. Fortunately, she recovered due to a combination of treatments that included not just pharmacotherapy, but also mindfulness-based psychotherapy, included repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, included exercise, diet, etc. So we found out about her through other people working at the VC support unit. And as our interests were in depression, we started talking with her and tried to develop some ideas together. So the first thing that I learned from her, it was what she was telling us: I don't want to feel better. I want to feel well. This is important in terms of depression because many times antidepressant drug therapy works, but works partially. So you feel better than before taking antidepressant, but it's not that you feel really well or that you feel like you were before. So we, as scientists, according to what our patient partner tells us, should devote our efforts not just in trying to find the solutions that make patients feel better, but trying to still reach one more step and finding solutions so that the patients really feel well at the end. And she was also asking us, can we find something that works fast, because antidepressants, they take a long time to work, and works for everyone, because in many cases they don't work. So what we are doing? We work basically with blood samples. This is a very nice slide because it has funny pictures with many colors. I will try to explain it in quite an easy way. We are taking blood samples from patients, and we are passing the patients some psychological scales so that they give us some questionnaires and we can ascertain the level of depression that we have. And then we use those samples to analyze some markers on them. So these are cells from the blood, and this is one of the markers that we use. We are labeling a protein, which is the serotonin transporter, which is a protein that antidepressants work on. And then we were comparing the analysis of the quantitative analysis of these green dots of the serotonin transporter in control samples and in depression samples. Basically, what we found was that in depression patients, that each patient here, it has a code, it has a number so that we don't know who is who. But in some depression patients, when they were not taking medication, they have, well, the serotonin transporter labeling was giving us some parameters that we can see here on this side of the graph, while many other patients, they were at this other side. What we tried to ascertain then is, well, is there differences in depression between the blue patients and the green patients? And what we found, it was that at the beginning, it wasn't so, but at the end, it was. We don't need to explain so much this graph, but we do it with the next slide, which is the one that we have for patients and for psychiatrists and other mental health workers. what we found is that the patients that according to our measurements were blue, what we call D1 patients, and the patients that according to our measurements were green, what we call D2 patients, after they were taking an antidepressant medication for 2 months, for about 8 weeks, they were showing a differential effect, in the sense that the D1 patients, many of them, almost 1/2, they didn't respond to the medication, while that the D2 patient, 3/4 of them basically showed remission of symptoms. That means they were not showing symptoms of depression anymore, and 25% they were responding, but up to a point. So at the beginning, with this graph, what it means is that we could tell the family physicians, or we could tell the psychiatrists, well, according to our measurements, you have a D1 patient. That means that very probably is not going to work so well with the conventional medication. So on top of medication, you should be making sure that this patient also has psychotherapy or other kinds of therapy that can help to a better outcome. While if we have a D2 patient, we could tell the psychiatrist, oh, this patient is going to work quite well with antidepressant medication, and probably that's it for him or for her. Now, what we have from Lisa, from our patient partner, is, oh, well, but here you have a bunch of people who in theory are responding, so they are feeling better, but they are not feeling well. They still have some symptoms of depression. So I'm not happy with the solution that you are giving to us. What I want you to do is to further investigate these people, so trying to find a way that you can move them from this column so that they show a betterment, but they are not feeling well, towards this one. That means that our research will not be just related to what we have right now and what we can tell the psychiatrists, but we want you guys to do more things. And we are trying to do so. And we are also trying to do this same kind of studies, not just for depression, but for people with other mood or psychotic disorders, for example, with bipolar disorder patients or with schizophrenia patients. What we are finding at this point is that perhaps we can use our strategy of our analysis of CERT to help the psychiatrists with a differential diagnosis between what is bipolar disorder, what is schizophrenia, and then what is depression in the subtypes. Because as here we can see, for example, the red dots, that means bipolar disorder patients, are different than the purple dots, which are schizophrenia patients. That was not a question that at the beginning was prompted to us by our patient partners, but it was prompted to us by clinicians who are also part of the research team. You know, the clinicians were telling us, well, sometimes it's difficult to differentiate at the beginning between bipolar disorder and schizophrenia patients. It would be quite useful if we were having a test that could help us with that. So what we are trying to ascertain is if this test that we are doing can help the clinicians to provide a better diagnosis, and a better diagnosis usually will go related to a better therapeutics in the terms of a more accurate drug therapy, and thereby we hope that with better outcomes in terms of improving the mental health of the patients. Now, these were also patients that when we examined them, they were not taking any medication. When they took their appropriate medication, different medication according to the diagnosis that we have, what we found was that there were some changes in the analysis of our marker, and that these changes, for example, the bipolars were moving in this direction with the medication, the schizophrenics in this direction, some of the depression patients in this direction. this change correlates positively with a good response to medication. So now what we can tell our patient panels and what we can tell the clinicians is that perhaps we can work more on this strategy so that we can help you guys in giving you the most appropriate medication for whatever condition you have. And that was the answer to one of the main questions that the survey in Alberta by people with living experience was bringing to us, the researchers. A second question was in terms of try to find something that was fast and that was better to what we have right now, because then our mental health outcomes will improve, and at the end, that's what we want. So I'm going to be very brief in this slide because then I want to explain my philosophy in more detail. But what we are doing in our lab here, and this goes with animal models, is to take some of the studies that we have done in the past that indicated to us that possible some specific molecules may have an antidepressant-like effect, and we are assaying these molecules in animals, trying to see if they do have an antidepressant-like effect, and if this effect is found out in a fast time, so from one day to the other in 24 hours. So right now, what we are finding is that one of these molecules, this is a big slide, quite complicated. I don't need to go into them because we do this assays in animals. We are stressing out the animals, made them depressive-like. We do some behavioral studies to analyze if they are really depressive or not. Then we give our new compound, and we found that solves the problem. That's basically what we are doing. And we are quite excited because our preliminary data shows that it's possible that this new molecule that we are studying may have a fast antidepressant effect, which will also help to solve some of the issues that the patients were bringing to us. I'm just going to go now to summarize all the research that we are doing, because most of this data that I have been showing now, we are doing it here in Vitoria, and we are doing with my past collaborators in Spain, but we are also working with family physicians in Saskatchewan. We are working about the effectiveness of repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation with Dr. Fidel Villa-Rodriguez at UBC. This treatment is already recommended by the Canadian Psychiatric Association for the use in patients that are resistant to conventional treatments, but is not sponsored by the health system in BC, so it's not being paid by the health system in BC. In this case, our research, what is trying to show is that the improvement in patients, at least in some specific patients, is more than enough to foster the health system to cover its cost. But one needs to do the research to show that, and that's what we are trying to do right now. So in summary, just for the last 5 or 10 minutes of this talk, and then we can open a possible discussion, I want to summarize what I have been doing and how we are trying to integrate now patients, not just in helping us developing research questions, but also in other components of our research. So I have been working in this business, as the slides say, basically you can read it there, for more than 25 years. In the past, I was working in some psychiatric institutes in the US, for example, in Orangeburg, just outside New York City, where there were these big asylums that were crowded with psychiatric patients in the 1940s and 1950s. And then with the development of psychiatric medications, basically, many of the patients were released, and some of the buildings were reused to do to do research. So I was working in some of them. And the good thing of that is that when you were coming out of the building, you were finding many patients, and patients who wanted to talk with you and who were quite curious about what you were doing and who were very opinionated about the research that you were doing or you were not. And they wanted you to try to solve other questions and to develop different ideas, etc. So although this has been a long time ago, it has been in my mind since that time. And the thoughts that I was having is that perhaps we should try to find a way to incorporate this interest of the patients as part of our research and not just be doing the research per se by the researchers alone or in connection with just clinicians. So that was in my mind, but for many years I was engaged in what is called now a POR approach. Although I continued to work on mental health. I did it also in Spain when I came back from my research stay in the US. And but already when I moved to Canada and at the University of Saskatchewan, we talked with family physicians and we started talking with patients. We got some fundraising settings that allowed us to collect some money from donors and multiple advocates. And there we are trying to use a strategy, trying to define to which the patients they will do well with medication alone, or to which the patients will need other kinds of care too, and try to do an analysis of the cost associated to this other kind of care, trying to show the government, in this case the government of Saskatchewan, that it makes sense to make an investment in this other kind of care because the costs associated with depression, they are huge, and this cost of extra type of care will compensate the numerous expenses that we have right now with treatment of depression patients. So we moved to Victoria in 2017, and very soon I had the opportunity to connect with the VC support unit that also support, the acronym doesn't come directly from supporting, but in this case, they have been very supportive of my research. They have been helping us basically at every level of what we are trying to do. They have helped us to connect with patients. We are trying to expand our POR-related component of research, not just to depression or mood-related disorders, but also to psychotic disorders. We will be participating at the end of this month in the psychosis conference here in Victoria, sponsored by Mental Health Recovery Partners, and we will try to bring our approach here. So after more than 25 years as a basic scientist working in many different aspects of mental health, what I do believe is that POR is not just important, but is especially important when it is applied to mental health research. For what I was saying at the beginning, that sometimes we are just putting patients into barrels, the explanation part, but we are losing the understanding and the focus of what is important for the people with living experience per se, and we can regain that by using a POR approach. It helps to diminish the stigma. I'm sure of that. It helps people, at least the students in my lab and other people around me, to see mental health in a different way. It allows us to focus in more well-defined research strategies and in specific outcomes of importance for the patients. And it helps us with the translation of the research from the lab to the clinical setting, and from the clinical setting to the patient care setting, to the community health setting. So right now, a pet project that I'm trying to put some effort into developing we are not there yet, but is to integrate patient partners, not just in developing research questions, but in helping us on the day-to-day of our research. So I'm trying to design a pilot program, including well-selected patient partners who will shadow some of our students in the sense that they will get the proper credentials so that they can enter a lab and stay there. They will follow the students when the students are doing the research. They will be making questions to the students about what they are doing, how they are doing, and what are the expected outcomes. And what we expect from that is first, that our students, that in many cases they are basic science students, they don't have a career on mental health or being mental health practitioners, they will have a much better understanding of the patients and of what the patients want. The patients will have a better understanding of what we are trying to do in the lab. We will develop a dialogue between those that help them to interact in an easier way. And what we pretend is that at the end of 2 or 3 months, they simply will go to a workshop or to a specific meeting within the community or with patients associations to explain their experience and what they have learned. We also estimate that this is one of the best ways to first for patients to know what is really the research enterprise, and as primary stakeholders that have an interest on that, and also to help to decrease the stigma associated at many levels with these diseases. So I just brought a few questions to discuss. But obviously we will be open, or I will be open to discuss any and comment on anything that you guys will want to do. But to me it's important to talk about POR specifically mental health. If we believe a POR mental health will be of benefit or not, and why. How can we engage patient partners in mental health research, and what are the pros and cons of this strategy? And I just finished saying thank you to everyone. My email is there, so I will be available to answer questions now, but then if anyone wants to contact me by email, that would be great. And those are Casper and Karma talking about mental health. There are several reports now claiming that having pet animals and petting animals is one of the best things that you can do to help your, your self-assurance and your mental health in general. I bring them, these are my 2 Labradoodles, because unfortunately this past summer, Casper, the brown one, passed away, and that was quite hard for me. I love the doggies, and just wanted to bring a picture of them here at the end, because what we are trying to do in our approach is not for us. What I tell my students is that I'm settled in my career. I have a tenured position. I enjoy what I'm doing. I don't need to do anything extra. I cannot go further up in terms of my position at the university. But what I do want is to be able to help patients. I work on mental health, and at the end of the day, I will want to say that my career started this way, and at the end of my career, I was able to help people in this specific way. And I believe that POR is an approach that could be quite helpful in fostering better outcomes for mental health. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to close the slide presentation, and I will be willing to talk and discuss about any aspects that you guys may want to. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Caruncho. So I'm going to now unmute everybody, so you'd be able to share some questions with us. Oh, sorry guys. So you'd be able to share questions with the larger group, or, you know, ponder on some of those discussion questions that were raised at the end there. So the floor now is open to anybody. Everybody's been unmuted, I believe. So
it was muted earlier, so that's weird. Maybe
Sarah, just unmuted.
Again?
hi, I just unmuted everybody because we're going to have a discussion and open it up to questions for anybody that might have any questions for us. So feel free to ask your questions using either the chat box.
Belinda, I have some questions in the chat. So how we do that? Because if I'm typing, I don't pay attention.
Oh no, you can answer them. You can answer them any way you see best. So
I can get the questions in the chat, but I can just
say your answers. Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
So the first question is, what is reeling? Is it related to methionine? Are there ways to increase it in the diet? So reeling is a protein. It's a protein expressed in the brain, and it's also expressed in periphery. So it's expressed also in blood cells. What we found a long time ago is that patients with schizophrenia and patients with bipolar disorder, they have reeling brain levels that were about 1/2 of the conventional ones that were found in non-psychiatric patients. That was done simply by studies of postmortem brain samples. In the case of depression, while in schizophrenia and bipolar, those deficits were everywhere in the brain. In the case of depression, those deficits were just in one part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is part of the limbic system and is related to emotional memories, and they are disturbed in depression. So since then, we have the idea, well, perhaps increasing reeling levels somehow may help. And that's why we are doing our studies with the protein in animals, etc. Now, can really be modulated by the diet. I just have here one paper that is reeling is modulated by diet-induced obesity in a bad way, and has direct actions in some hypothalamic neurons that regulate stress. So the question is yes. What happens is that the answer that we have right now is that reeling can be regulated in a pathway by obesity-induced diets that I don't need to go into details because everyone can understand what we are trying to do so. So diet is very important in mental health. Okay, at the end is mens sana in corpore sano. What is good for your body usually is good for your mental health too. And there are many diet recommendations for some people with mood disorders. For example, we are assaying in Saskatchewan the possible effectiveness of anti-inflammatory diets. So to try to use nutrients that, for example, they reduce the number of oxygen-related species and I mean, basically fruit, some fish, but that doesn't mean that one cannot eat meat. I love meat, by the way. It's just to have an equilibrium diet. Now, obesity and mental health, they don't go well together. One of the recommendations that most mental health practitioners do, on top of prescribing specific things, etc., is about exercise and about diet. So if you can foster, if you are an obese person and you can change to a diet that reduces your levels of obesity, that will have probably a general effect on mental health. We don't know yet if that is done because less related to obesity diet increases the levels of reeling. But that's already one example of what we can do in animals, because we have a program in animals that is precisely trying to do the same thing, using different diets in animals, ones inducing obesity, others not, and see if that relates to brain reading levels. If that is the case, then we will go in humans, we will do a specific trial with one diet, another diet. We will take at the end blood samples and we will analyze the reading levels on that. So
there are a few other questions. Lisa would like you to talk more about your work with the BC Schizophrenia Society.
Yeah, no, I see the question there. Yes, we can. As I was mentioning at the beginning in the reading question, one of the very first findings that we had, it was that reading was decreased by about 50% or more in schizophrenia brains. So we were looking in detail what is the reason of that, and what we found it was that some epigenetic events, so not alterations per se in the gene that regulates reading expression, but external regulations that can come related to stress, to different life events, etc., can regulate the expression of reading there. So we are quite interested in terms of schizophrenia, and with the BC Schizophrenia Society, mostly in relation to early psychosis, in the sense that usually psychotic disorders, the onset, they tend to occur in the late adolescence or early adulthood. A little bit later for women than for men, but let's say that for men, the psychotic debut will be usually between 17 and 21, and for women between 21 and 25. In most cases, college, university years, that's when it happens. But sometimes it happens in adolescents before, when they are 14 or 15, and usually they are doing quite poorly. There is a lot of research in relation to early treatment in psychosis and the importance of early treatment in psychosis. In fact, the psychosis conference with the mental health recovery partners, it will be specifically about that. So, but for early treatment, you need to diagnose it as early as possible. Now, when one diagnoses a psychosis episode, is because the psychosis is present, but the psychosis is just the delusions and the hallucinations. But there are other symptoms related to schizophrenia, negative and cognitive symptoms, that are probably present because the psychotic onset, before the psychotic onset. So what we are trying to do is, if we can find a marker that will let us know, well, these people who is already, you know, it has a family history of schizophrenia, and now it looks much more shy, is 14, 15, and looks like much more shy than when it was 2 years ago. That usually we will be explaining it, okay, what happens is that, you know, he likes a girl and the girl is not paying attention to him, and that's why the guy is feeling boo, and that may be it, you know, there are adolescent issues. But when we differentiate those between, oh no, something is starting here, and if something is starting here, what the therapeutic approach is telling us is that as soon as you start treating it, much better. So that's the kind of approach that we are trying to foster with the BC Schizophrenia Society.
And there's one more question where Cindy's asked if you could describe your experience as a pro researcher trying to introduce the importance of empowering patients to be co-applicants on CIHR grants. What has your experience been addressing this aspect of POR?
Yes, in fact, Lisa can be a good witness about that, and perhaps she can talk better than me about it. You know, I think that I understood already 25 years ago, that was why I was giving the sample of when I was in New York City, is how I know more about what is going on when I talk with patients, and not just when I get samples that they are being submitted to me from patients, and I get access to the psychological tests, and then we do our studies and we provide a solution. We learn much more from patients, but when you have that, you need to empower them. Now, not all the patients, at least that's my opinion, can be patient partners and can engage at the same level in the research investigation. But if they are willing to, and they are willing to learn about, I mean, I gave Lisa a little book on biomarkers, and I gave her some scientific presentations, and she came here and talked with my students and was with them in the lab and was seeing what my students were doing. That was previous for her to be included as a co-applicant in one of our grants that unfortunately at that time was not funded, but we hope to resubmit it again and to be luckier this time. So yes, first, there need to be a willingness and a knowledge. So the knowledge about POR, we are trying to foster it. This is one way to do so. We will be having a talk at the Mental Health Recovery Partners meeting. I had several talks about it just 1 month ago in Spain. I was talking about it with people from the National Institutes of Health in the US. So we need to explain the concept because it's not so well known. From there, you will have perhaps a few patients that come and contact you. That's why I give my email. And asking, well, I would be interested in knowing more or trying to find out if I could be a patient partner or not. And that is a two-pronged approach. First, I will put in contact these people with the BC support unit here in Victoria and with Lisa Ridgway, because she is already a patient partner on mental health, so that they know more about the approach. After they do so, if they come back to me and say, well, you know, I find that that's quite interesting, how can we move forward? And then I say, oh, let's come to UVic and we go for a coffee. And we talk, I just give free one afternoon or one whole morning, and we talk as much as you want about what we are doing, how we try to foster POR, and how we move from there. And then afterwards, we can visit the lab so that you can visit with the students. They can show you what they are doing, and I will not be there. So the students will be the ones telling you. If you are still interested, or in many cases more interested in, then we can talk about, okay, what are the questions that are of interest for you, and see if we can do some research related to that. And if that is the case, then I say, well, now you are part of the research because we are going to do it. We are going to keep you informed of the data that we are having, and you are going to be helping us to analyze the meaning of the data. Because at the end of the day, the outcomes is if the data is meaningful to you, if it can help you at whatever level. And basically, that's what we are trying to do. Or at least that's my personal approach as a basic scientist. One needs to understand that I'm a basic scientist working in the lab and working also in the clinic, but I'm not a community health scientist. I don't work in public health so much, and I'm not a clinician per se. Although I do talk a lot with clinicians, and I have a very good relation with many of them.
So we have one final question from Lisa, and she's asking when the conference on mental recovery is, and can we learn more about poor and mental health at this conference?
Okay, yes. What I can do is, do you have access to everyone who is on?
Yes, yes,
because then I send information to you with the triptych. I mean, is here in Victoria. I think that is the.
Or if you have poster information on it, and you were to send it to me, I can post it on our website if that's something that's open to everybody.
Okay,
yeah.
that would be the easiest way to do. Yes, there are very different talks. It's mostly about early psychosis intervention, and we have one of the talks is given by myself, and it's about POR in early psychosis intervention.
Well, it looks like that concludes the questions that we have via the chat. So if anybody has any more questions, you could use your microphone to share them, or like before, use the chat. So we'll give everybody a few minutes to ask any last minute questions that you might have.
Okay, no, thank you so much. I will be willing, again, my email was there, Hector J. Caruncho @uvic.ca. And any questions, any comments that you may have. Not only if you have comments or if you have questions, but also if you have comments about the webinar, in the sense, if you do it other time, focus more on this thing, do this other thing, because I learn from you guys. You know, that's how this works.
All right, thank you so much for presenting, Hector, and thank you for everybody for being on the call. Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.